So thank you everyone for coming tonight, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the fourth Kirsty Wayland Memorial Lecture, and it's the 21st lecture in the original series of annual lectures on questions relating to disability, neurodiversity and inclusion, hosted by the ADRC, which is the University's Accessibility and Disability Resource Centre, and St John's College. So my name is John Harding. I'm the head of the University's Inclusive Education Hub, and a Fellow in Education and Disability Support at Queen's College, Cambridge. So I'm currently on secondment from my role as head of the ADRC. And I'm standing in today for our usual host, Richard Partington, the senior tutor of St John's, as very unfortunately Richard broke his ankle recently while visiting Portugal and is currently incapacitated, so we all wish him a speedy recovery. So the pleasure of the required health and safety announcement falls to me. So there is no fire drill planned. There are emergency exits on both sides, and there are accessible toilets in the basement and on the ground floor, and there are other toilets on the first floor and in the basement as well. So for those of you who don't know, Kirsty was a long-serving, brilliant and beloved ADRC colleague who we continue to miss greatly. Amongst her many achievements, Kirsty was instrumental in the establishment and continued success of this series of lectures from their instigation in 2003. I worked very closely with Kirsty for over 15 years as her line manager and colleague on a wide range of disability-related projects, including the planning and preparation for these lectures. And it still feels very strange doing that without her. It's a particular pleasure again to welcome Kirsty's husband Matt to the lecture this evening, and I recognise in the audience many other people who worked with Kirsty over the years, and we thank you for your continued support of the lecture series. So, there's my clicker. I also want to say a few words of appreciation and remembrance for Ray Jobling, who died early this year. Ray was the senior tutor of St John's from 1991 to 2003, and he was instrumental in setting up the original Disability Resource Centre, chairing its management committee for many years. And Ray was also host of this lecture series from 2003 until 2019. Ray was a respected academic, sociologist and public health campaigner, and Ray, like Kirsty, was formidable, knowledgeable and determined character. And Kirsty and Ray had a great deal of respect and admiration for each other. Ray was a mentor and sounding board for me, and always generous with his time and his advice, and both are sorely missed. However, their legacy lives on in this lecture series. Warmest thanks as ever to the ADRC team, particularly Kate and Joanna, and everyone here this evening for all your hard work in setting up and running the event, and to the St John's Conference and Catering team for their support. And Richard's asked me to say that it is his privilege as well as his pleasure for St John's College to host the Collegiate University's primary annual disability event. And the ADRC team have asked me to express their appreciation for the college's ongoing backing for the lecture and for its generosity in providing the space for it to take place. And sincere appreciation also goes to the university's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team for their continued financial support of the event. So we always attempt to make these events accessible as possible, which is why there was a short delay while we got the live captioning working, which I can see that it is good. There are BSL interpreters. There's also a QR code if you wanted to get live captions on your phone. We will make an accessible recording available after the lecture. Usually takes about 2 or 3 weeks for us to make sure that we've got the captions and that we're showing the BSL interpreters. We did try and live stream it once, it was an absolute disaster, so we decided we'd never do that again. So it is accessible as we can make it. So there will be a short Q&A after the lecture. We do have limited time, we've probably eaten into it by about 5 minutes now as well. So we'll be grateful if you ask a question, can you ask a question? And can you make it brief and concise? And then we'll try and fit in as many questions as we can. We'd also ask you to wait for the roving microphone to reach you before you start your question. Thank you. There There may be additional times for individual questions to our guest lecturer at the drinks reception after the event, but please let her get a drink first. So we always try and ensure that the subject of the lecture is current and topical, with a focus on disability and neurodiversity and inclusive educational practice. And that's very true of the topic of our lecture this evening, which also aligns very well with the Pathways to Inclusive Practice programme that we're currently running at Cambridge, and also the work that I've been doing with the Office for Students on their Disability in Higher Education Advisory Panel. So we're delighted that Professor Suanne Gibson accepted our invitation to be our guest lecturer this evening. But I'm now honoured to introduce my colleague, Professor Jess Gwynne, who will give a short opening address introducing our speaker in more detail than I just did, and the focus of her lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this year's Kirsty Wayland Memorial Lecture. And also my thanks to St John's College for your continued support for this very important event. So my name's Jess Gwynne, and I'm here in my capacity as Academic Leadership Fellow. So I work closely with Professor Bascavira, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Education, to implement the recommendations from the university's recent teaching review. My work also ties in closely with John's work on the university's new Pathways to Inclusive Practice programme. So I'm really delighted to have been asked to introduce today's speaker, Professor Suanne Gibson, Professor of Inclusive Education at the University of Plymouth. So Professor Gibson is a leading scholar and national advocate for disability rights and inclusive practice within higher education. Her work is grounded in a commitment to equity, social justice, and the transformation of educational structures to better serve disabled students. Her National Office for Students project advances a user-led, user-informed, and user-evaluated methodology, ensuring that the lived experiences of disabled students directly shapes institutional policies and practices. This approach positions disabled students as active partners in the co-creation of more equitable systems, rather than passive recipients of support. So through this model, Professor Gibson champions authentic co-production, accountability, and structural change across the sector. With a career of over 20 years dedicated to widening participation, inclusive curriculum design, and disability rights advocacy, she's worked closely with policymakers, educators, and student communities to challenge deficit narratives and embed justice-oriented principles into the core of university life. Her research, teaching, and leadership consistently bring the voices of disabled students and the need for systemic, not superficial reform into the foreground. Professor Gibson's scholarship and public engagement have established her as a respected national figure in inclusive education, someone who brings clarity, compassion, and rigorous methodology to the ongoing work of ensuring that all students can thrive within higher education. She works with Lord Chris Holmes, a prominent advocate for disability rights and education. And she partners with Disabled Students UK and Disability Rights UK on national conversations and initiatives focused on improving accessibility, tackling systemic barriers, and strengthening inclusive policy frameworks within education and beyond. She received the prestigious National Teaching Fellowship Award from Advance HE in 2012 for her impact on student outcomes and teaching in higher education, followed by the HEA's Ron Cook International Scholarship in 2014 for her work in inclusive education. And she was invited to join the Royal Society of the Arts as a fellow in 2014. In 2022, she was also awarded the University of Plymouth's Research Impact Award for outstanding impact in public policy, law, and services. Across all her roles, Professor Gibson is driven by the belief that equity in education is a collective responsibility. Through research, leadership, partnership, and hands-on community engagement, she continues to shape a more inclusive, just, and compassionate higher education system, one that affords all learners the opportunity to thrive. Given the direct parallels between Professor Gibson's work and her current OFS project with our own Pathways to Inclusive Practice programme, this lecture is highly topical and timely. So please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Suanne Gibson.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, John. I feel very privileged to be here in this space, and it brings me much joy to share my work and my team's work. I work in collaboration with many exceptional people, students and colleagues. So sharing that with you today brings me a lot of joy. And I see around me, and from those that I've engaged with earlier as you were arriving, I think we've got a room full of thinkers and doers when it comes to social justice and equality. And I very much hope that each of you will take something of significance away with you today and put that into your spaces for thinking and fundamentally for doing. So a big thank you to Kate and to Jess and Joanna and team, and Kate as well, for their work in organising this important event, and for the introductions, and John for your invitation. I also wish to acknowledge from the start of my talk today the importance and the work of my collaborators and partners of many years, Dr. Francesca Peruzzo, who is based at Birmingham University, and Professor Zita Williams-Jones, who is based at Wolverhampton University. Also my colleagues who I work closely with at Disabled Students UK and Disability Rights UK. And of course, our current project funders, the Office for Students, without whom this work couldn't currently be undertaken. So a quick little bit about me. You've already heard quite a bit. But yes, I've got 20 years experience of working in higher education and teaching, research and leadership positions, and 10 years prior to that of working as a teacher and a youth worker in education and in the third sector in organisations in Northern Ireland, Scotland and England. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 18. Yes, smack bang in the middle of my A-levels. And that has made for a very interesting, challenging, and I would also add, rich life and career journey. Thus, my work sits at the intersection of disability, inclusive education and social justice, with a specific focus on the ways in which higher education functions as a site of hegemonic power, systematically reproducing inequality and resisting equality in action through dominant cultures, institutional systems and normative behaviours. For this evening's talk, I will focus on a central strand of my work, one that is deeply embedded in how I understand the purposes of education and where I see its current challenges. Also, it's what I believe to be our collective way forward for equity in the HE sector and beyond. Specifically, this is my stance on a user-led, user-informed, user-evaluated methodology in all that we do. So there are 3 key words or terms that I wish for you to log this afternoon as we go through the next 40 minutes. And I hope that they will really link to and make clearer in your mind as we're going through some of the key points and arguments and practices that I'm advocating or my work is advocating for. The first one is about user leadership. Now, what I mean by user are students. Without our students, we wouldn't be here, right? Many of us wouldn't have jobs if it wasn't for the students that we teach and we work with. And they are fundamental to everything that we believe in when it comes to education and university and what its purpose is for. It's about supporting and bringing the next generation through into our society. So user leadership is fundamental to this work. And I think our students for too long have been undervalued and silenced and not listened to when it comes to this fundamental work of social equality and social justice in higher education. So user leadership, hang on to that as we go through. The second key term I really want you to hang on to is that of cross-institutional partnership. One of the things that I know many of us here in this space will be familiar with is the challenge of siloing. Yeah, so user leadership, cross-institutional partnership to challenge the siloing that takes place in a lot of this work, and also establishing and sustaining equity through systemic, cultural and behavioural change. Okay, so very briefly, this is what you have to look forward to for the next 35 minutes, okay? And what I do want you to hold again with you as we go through is an understanding about the title of the Office for Students work that I'm undertaking. The project is called Addressing Disparity of Support, Co-Creating Continued Professional Developments and Guidelines for Reasonable Adjustments with Disabled Students. So the rest of my time this afternoon is going to be walking you through some of these key themes that very much connect to the work that we're doing with Office for Students. But the key point that really is emergent from the work is that of user-informed, user-led, user-evaluated methodology, CPD and guidelines for the sector. And that's the title, just to go through that again. So widening participation, inclusive policy and inclusive practice have been a central focus and a powerful ideological driver in UK education and particularly higher education since 2001. Many of you in this room will remember the 2001 Special Educational Needs and Disability Act. 2001, how many years ago was that? And we're still asking the same questions today, 25 years later. So over the last 25 years, we have seen an increase in policy emphasis on equity, on fairer access to higher education, on more inclusive learning experiences, and on students' sense of belonging, on achievement and progression. Now, these ambitions are now well established in both the discourse and regulation of HE and social justice. There has been progress in real numbers. So in 2001, HESA data indicated that around 6 to 7% of our UK higher education students had a disclosed disability. Today, we're looking at closer to 20% of our students have a disclosed disability. And of course, we'll also be familiar that there will be many other students who have not had the support or been able to take forward a disclosure yet. So this equates to currently approximately 500,000 disabled students currently in higher education. However, numbers only tell us one part of the story. And they also tell another story, and that's the neoliberal one. The bums on seats, the recruitment, and the headcount, which we know is a complex and at present extremely challenging issue for the sector. So a quick look at the blue points here, just to familiarise yourself or just to think about where and how the numbers have risen over time in terms of enrolments and numbers of disclosures. And what we're seeing from the research and a lot of my work over the last 15 years, if we go right back to the work I did with Liz Kendall from Liverpool Hope University, also funded by the Higher Education Academy, we're still seeing evidence of continued silencing, misrepresentation and failures in provision and student experience, or equitable disabled student experience. So back to what equitable education progression actually means for disabled students. We know from the many research projects that have been undertaken over the past 20 years, including my own work, and the quantitative and the qualitative work, that the lived realities of disabled students remain complex, uneven, unequal, and deeply nuanced. Too often, those realities are not understood, they are underrepresented and under-theorised. So what are the ongoing challenges that we have across the sector? How does ableism exist and manifest within our universities and across the sector? That's a question I think we really need to consider and explore before we can start coming up with any answers to address equity. So in 2020, the Office for Students reported persistent attainment and outcome gaps between disabled and non-disabled students, with disabled students achieving lower degree results overall and experiencing poor employment outcomes after graduation. A recent study I undertook with Professor Zita Williams-Brown and also Meta Answer from Disabled Students UK and published in 2024 shows that these structural inequalities remain deeply embedded. Students described ongoing discrimination and what many explicitly named as continued ableism within higher education, which was driven by a lack of knowledge, a lack of support, and a lack of general awareness across institutions. Participants spoke of a weak sense of belonging, and I think that's a really important point to consider. This word has been bandied around an awful lot recently, particularly in the post-16 and the mainstream primary and secondary sector in relation to special educational needs, disability inclusion. And I think it's a very important term, because if we don't have belonging, if we don't feel that we're a part of a practice or an initiative or a space, well, then we're not really present in that space. So I think that's a key point and a key question that really needs to be considered by leaders and doers within this field when it comes to what our real experience is for our disabled students. How much do they feel a sense of belonging? How much do they feel that they are seen or they're understood? Qualitatively, the picture is stark. 43% of the participants that took part in that research in 2024 maintained that they had experienced discrimination or negative bias, and over half, 57%, reported ableism. None felt that the language used around disability in their institutions was positive, suggesting that ableism is not only structural, but also cultural. As one doctoral student put it, universities continue to take a reactive and individualised approach to disability, seeing disabled students as problems to be managed rather than addressing the systems and structures that create exclusion in the first place. So let's take a look at some of the figures here. And I've just pulled out some figures from my own university to highlight the attainment gap that is present within our School of Engineering, Computing and Mathematics. Now, I've been involved in another piece of research within that school over the last couple of years, working with schools in the Plymouth area on post-16 progression and mentoring for young people who may be disadvantaged either through disability, special needs or other forms of disadvantage or protected characteristics. And what we know is that in 21-22, the attainment gap for our disabled students within that school, just to give you an example, was minus 5.9. And in 23 to 24, it has risen. It's become more pronounced. We're now looking at minus 17.4 for students who are disabled, have disclosed disabilities within that school. We have a long way to go still. And that is precisely why this work around a user-informed approach and ultimately user-led really matters, because disabled students are telling us clearly that incremental fixes and compliance-driven responses are not enough. Now, in 2022, Disabled Students UK were involved in a very fundamental, significant piece of research where they undertook a series of questionnaires with disabled students across the country, and their synopsis was the following. You can see the six key points. Now, they've done a lot of significant work since, but there's 6 post-pandemic lessons where universities need to take an anticipatory approach. Anticipatory approaches were very much written into the Special Educational Needs Disability Act in 2001, and we're still here today. Resource staff to provide accessibility. We need to reduce the admin burden, improve effective leadership, listen to our students, and build enabling attitudes across staff. So I want to pause to really reflect on the incredible work that Meta and her team did back at the time. And of course, that was just over shortly and continued after the pandemic. And what they were able to produce in terms of this report was something that then instigated an annual series of surveys to be conducted across the sector for us to hear from disabled students about where universities are getting inclusion right and where universities are still getting it wrong. So I think we need to acknowledge really Disabled Students UK and the ongoing exceptional work they are doing in that field. So I work closely with Meta and the DS UK, and I also work closely with Lord Chris Holmes at that time. And we brought Lord Holmes together with DS UK, and a significant piece of work was done around the disabled students' allowance provision, and subsequent to that, policy was changed, and we now have what is considered to be a more user-informed approach to equitable disabled students' allowance. I still feel that there are questions over how effective that provision is, and that we do still need to consider critically what works and what doesn't work. So, the Office for Students project. Our project includes the following partners. So we have University of Plymouth, University of Wolverhampton and the University of Birmingham, Disabled Students UK and Disability Rights UK. And all of these colleagues within these universities, and also my colleagues in the third sector organisations, we've worked together closely for many years. But this particular project is really bringing a lot of that expertise together. And we are working to assess the effectiveness of current sector and contextual institutional reasonable adjustment plans. Where are we getting that right and where are we not getting it right, both in the academic context and in the personal support structure. So it very much aligns to, and we are exploring the Office for Students risk areas of risk 6 and risk 7. Now, we know that reasonable adjustment plans can include things like alternative assessments, accessible learning environments, mentoring, counselling, and other accommodations. However, what both research and lived experience continue to show is that delivery is often fragmented, inconsistent, and overly dependent on individual staff goodwill rather than embedded systems or individual student work. So a defining feature of the work is that of our user-led approach, and it centres on student voice and lived experience. And I think what's been really rich about the work is that we've managed to bring together through a recruitment through a recruitment process, 6 disabled students who are working with us as co-leaders on the project. So we have 2 students from Plymouth, 2 students from Wolverhampton, and 2 from Birmingham who are helping with conducting the research, developing the methodology, collecting the data, doing the analysis, and then coming up with what comes next in terms of the CPD programme. So they are core members of the project. They are also paid for their time, as it should be. So our key aims are straightforward but ambitious. Firstly, we are aiming to enhance inclusive academic support by co-creating CPD resources that embed students' lived experiences, or as I like to refer to it, their lived expertise, directly into our teaching, learning and assessment practices. Secondly, we are aiming to improve university practices regarding disabled students' personal support and develop CPD for student services and academic staff that is embedded, or grounded rather, in disabled students' real lived experiences. Thirdly, we are aiming to generate and share replicable, sector-wide guidance, moving beyond local fixes to address on-course equity and more systemically across the sector. And fourthly, we're focused on sustained impact. This kind of work is all well and good, but if we do the work, present the work, make a few changes, and then walk away from the work, what happens? We're back to where we started, potentially. And we know from the research in this area, in this field, that has happened a lot. So our plan and our aim is to continue the work after this particular project wraps up at the beginning of the new year. So a quick overview of the timeline then. This gives you a quick overview. The funding came through in March 2025. We undertook a survey. It's been referred to by leaders in the field as quite an innovative survey, in that it's the first survey of its kind that has been conducted with both students, academic staff and support staff. Our subsequent stage are a series of workshops where we're using the findings of the survey to feed into a workshop which we have conducted with disabled students in our 3 universities, but we will also next month be conducting with our support staff and our academic staff. Because when we talk about this work being user-led, we're talking about user expertise. We're not just talking about the user expertise of our students, we're also talking about the user expertise of our staff, our student support staff and our academic staff, many of whom do exceptional work in realising and implementing inclusion and equality in their spaces. Stage 3 will be drawing on the CPD development, and over the summer, along with our co-researchers, we're putting together a CPD programme. We currently have the website domain, just bought that actually 4 days ago from the project budget, and it's called Co-Creating for Higher Education. So we were very happy that nobody else had stole that domain name before us. So the CPD will be developed over the summer, again with our students being involved in developing the tools and developing the online resources. And then the final stage will be conducting a trial, doing an evaluation with staff members from across our 3 universities, and then getting our findings out in the new year, February, March next year, where we will be publishing a lot of the work and ultimately making the material available for download and accessibility across the sector. That's what we want out of this. We want can-do, hands-on examples of practice for CPD and working with disabled students that has been evidenced through our work as a workable and effective way forward. So that website, those web pages, will be available at the end of the project. So we're applying what we see as, and when I say we, just to clarify that, I'm not just talking about me and my academics in higher education, I'm talking about our project as a whole and its members. When we started the work, we worked closely with Meta and her colleagues at DS UK to really work with their expertise and making sure that from the very outset, this project lived up to what it was claiming to be about, which was about disabled student expertise and user-led input. So in terms of that importance then, when I refer to we, I'm talking about the entire team, and I'm including within that our disabled students as well as academic staff and support staff. So we see this project and this approach as an innovative and an inclusive approach, and our methodology, user-led, emerges from my long-standing work critiquing inclusive education and positioning disability as a complex lived experience, and having lived it myself, and for many of you who may also align with the definition or the term disability, you'll know it's complex. And it can, of course, be defined, understood or misunderstood in many ways as a social construct, to a pejorative label, a reappropriated word, an identity, a community, part of the inevitable part of the human experience, painful, joyous, a revolutionary entity, and it's also life. So the user-led work comes from my team stance that knowledge about disability has too often been produced about disabled people rather than with or led by them. And this, of course, then links to the renowned phrase, nothing about us without us, which has been coined by many and has deep historical roots, but for many of you, you'll associate it with the work of James Charton in the 1990s and his demand for self-determination, power sharing, and lived expertise. Taken together, our four-way approach, user-informed, policy expertise, inclusive research design, and lived expertise and co-creation, positions lived experience as central to producing meaningful, ethical, and impactful research and outputs in disability inclusion. This is us just a few weeks ago at Wolverhampton, where we were conducting our workshop with the Wolverhampton students. So we ran workshops at Wolverhampton and at Birmingham and in Plymouth with approximately 10 disabled students who were recruited as a part of the project. And those have now been completed, and we're undertaking the data analysis with our co-researchers as we go through thinking about what comes next in terms of developing and then implementing the co-produced CPD tools and guidelines. So this was us after the end of what was a fun day in gathering ideas and bringing some key points together at Wolverhampton. This video, in terms of the time that we have, let's have a quick look. We're not going to, oh, it's gone straight on, yeah. Can I just move on from that? Yeah, so we're not actually going to watch it in this space, but I would suggest if you do want to have a look at it afterwards, please do so. It gives you a sort of an example of the sort of hands-on approach of the way in which we tried to implement a more inclusive approach to the recruitment of our student co-researchers and the conducting of the research and development, rather, of the research tools. So why are we emphasising the need for a joined-up and a co-created approach? We've got a publication that came out recently in Wonky. Most of you will be familiar with the Wonky platform, a very interesting and critical platform that addresses and dissects policy and ways in which it may work or not work for inclusion and equity. So we published a paper in Wonky just a few years ago, and in that paper we really are highlighting where the problems and the barriers arise. The Publication picks up on the importance of looking at ecology and where barriers are cumulative and systemic, where responsibilities are split between departments and services, where data can be siloed, and there's a blurred accountability which undermines consistency. So I'd recommend that's something we would follow up on to have a look at that article as well. So what are our findings so far? So from the survey, what we're seeing from our disabled students and our academic staff and our student services are the following key 6 findings. That there are critical process delays and implementation gaps. There is systematic communication failures. There is inconsistent staff knowledge and training needs, critical staffing and resource constraints, universal design implementation failures, and a disproportionate burden on students to self-advocate. We gathered questionnaire responses from a total of 239 disabled students, 37 academic staff, and 19 professional services staff. And the analysis, as I mentioned earlier, was done with our team of disabled students as well as academic staff. And I think these speak very strongly. Some of the stories shared by our students, I'll just jump through to that, because I think it's, yeah. Some of the stories shared by students, I think, speak quite powerfully. I'll just give you a minute to have a look at that. We've got communicating through your tutor is like playing a professional game of Chinese whispers. Lecturers do not always wear microphones. Captions are almost never put on. Left behind, alienated, forgotten. These are not words that we want to hear our students talking about or sharing when it comes to their lived experience at university. The headline findings, more than 27% of our student responses, that's out of 239 disabled students, waited more than 2 months for the reasonable adjustment plan to be completed and implemented. And yet, here we are, 2006, and we think back at 2001 and the SENDA Act, and this anticipatory practice and provision should be in place before they begin their course. Now, many universities and many places are getting it right, but more than 27% is still too much. More than 50% talked about what they felt was a very passive approach, that they were not being proactively contacted about their reasonable adjustment plans. 70% had their reasonable adjustment plan reviewed once or not at all in the past year. And for many, they maintained that basic universal design for learning elements like captions, mics, lecture capture were inconsistent. I'm going to whiz through those. That's just another representation of the figures we've just looked at for those of you who prefer a bar chart approach. I'm not a bar chart person myself. I prefer the words and the numbers. Okay. So only 42% of students believe that staff had received adequate training. Staff understanding of reasonable adjustment plans, they rated this is coming from the staff themselves, they rated their understanding as neutral or mixed. They weren't overly confident. And the effectiveness in applying reasonable adjustment plans, and this is feedback from students as well as staff, academic staff and student services staff, was often inconsistent. Student views on staff attitudes, knowledge and training. Knowledge is a huge problem. People think they understand various disabilities, but they really don't, especially if yours is less commonly spoken about, and I would refer to another quotation from one of the students when we were talking the other day, the challenge of invisible disabilities and where we can ensure that they are being picked up and understood by all of our staff. As I said earlier, this work is very much user-informed, so we need to think about our users, our academic staff as users, and what their voices have been in the process. Many of them are talking about being exhausted. They feel they're missing support with CPD. They feel that the reasonable adjustment plans are too generic. They don't see how that can be translated into their lecture theatre or their workshop. And inclusion, they're arguing, cannot be, and we know this should not be, a bolt-on exercise and a time to think through the best ways of supporting all students not being made available. So it's got to be present in our thinking, in our practice, in our conversations at all times in academic work with our students. student support staff voices, so this is coming from our student services voices. The compassion fatigue, I thought that was a very powerful point that they talked about in relation to their workload, is accumulative and builds between one point of leave to another. I believe colleagues should have supervision. Understanding of lecture capture across the university is varied, and we are aware that some programmes still refuse to record their content. Inclusive practice needs to be more embedded and less optional. It really shouldn't be optional anymore. So our findings effectively map onto the Office for Students Risk 6 and Risk 7. Insufficient academic support and insufficient personal support. So what we're finding is that there are continuous delays in implementing adjustments. Lecturers are lacking access to reasonable adjustment plans or understanding what reasonable adjustment plans are and where they sit. There's fragmented communication between departments. There is inconsistent staff knowledge. And then in relation to personal support, overwhelming communication processes, increasing stress among staff as well as students, dismissive attitudes, making students feel misunderstood, the burden of navigating complex systems without guidance. Now that ties right back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of the Disabled Students UK research and the burden on students themselves having to undertake finding where the support can be and how that can lead to fatigue and to further disable the student as well. So what next? It's very much about our user-led, user-informed and user-evaluated approach. Now, to be clear, this work does not offer a single holy grail or a one-size-fits-all model. That simply would not be credible or desirable, given the diversity of our institutions and our student communities. Instead, what we are proposing is an ecological model. And again, that links back to the wonky article we've recently published and also the work coming out of our intern report, which will be available in the next 2 weeks. So I'll be happy to share that with you in due course. So we're proposing an ecological model, one that recognises inclusion as something that must be interpreted, adapted and co-created locally, while remaining systematically connected across the institution. And the next phase of this work, therefore, must be about the translation of this model into practice. And we are hoping to work to develop case studies into some key universities moving forward, where the model can be actively trialled and we can evaluate, see what works best, see what needs to be enhanced, and what else we can learn from this field. So we want to map the end-to-end journey, really, from disclosure, when a student discloses a disability, whether that's at the UCAS application stage or during induction week or in advance of coming to the university. We want to map what happens for those students as they go through from that point, through their university experience, progressing through their courses, and then out the other end as a successful graduate moving into the workplace. We want to co-create what will become Use Tomorrow CPD with lived expertise at the centre. And ideally, we want to publish a single visible pathway with roles, timeframes and escalation. So again, this model of what works best in terms of assessing student need, providing for student need and supporting our academic and student services staff as well in terms of their workload. So at the heart of this work, immediate actions, just to give you a second to look at those because I think that's really important. This actually was pulled out from the last 2 workshops we did with our student co-research. We spent quite a bit of time on this and what was felt to be potential immediate actions coming forward and then also systemic shifts because as we know, change doesn't happen overnight. And if we're looking at cultural change, it takes time to bed down. So immediate actions could be publishing a single visible pathway for each student, mandating baseline UDL. So at the minute we are finding that it still seems to be an attitude amongst some staff that lecture recording and captions are optional. We need to mandate accessibility reviews and we need to better fund our disability services staff in order to enable them to do as best as they can. And we know that there is a challenge at the minute across the sector in terms of staff workload and in terms of economics as well and getting the job done. So we're looking also at systemic shifts rather. So building a proactive RAP review process, embedding student-led forums and publishing improvement actions and evidence. And that's what we understand as what a joined-up, co-created pathway could deliver within the university. A transparent and co-owned process, fewer student reminders, faster timelines, adjustments being enacted and reviewed regularly. This speaks again to some of the points I raised earlier, but I think very much the key point that we're trying to push with this research and what we're finding from what we are finding from our findings is that to make this work going forward, we need to have co-leadership with our disabled students at every stage. So finally, our work calls us as a sector to move beyond compliance and good intentions and reconsider higher education with disabled people as leaders, experts, and partners in the change process. If we are serious that equity is to be our future, and we want to have equitable experience, progression, and outcomes for our disabled students, and align with the belief that nothing about us without us, then we must embed disabled students' lived expertise and leadership into our university's governance, into its teaching, and into its quality assurance as well. Thank you very much.